The hum of a Boeing 777's engine is the sound of possibility of moving from one world to another. But for one young woman, that sound became the backdrop to a bitter confrontation at 35,000 feet. It started with a look of disbelief, a condescending sneer from a fellow passenger who decided that the color of a person's skin determined the color of their credit card. She judged a brilliant mind by her youthful appearance and judged her place in the world based on prejudice as old as time. What she didn't know was that her victim wasn't just any student, and the card in her wallet was more than just a piece of plastic. It was a key that would unlock a chain of events so devastating it would dismantle a life built on arrogance, one excruciating tweet at a time. This is the story of how a single act of bigotry in business class triggered a real-life karmic collapse of epic proportions. The Centurion Lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was an oasis of curated calm amidst the terminal's frantic energy. Here, the chaos of travel was muted, replaced by the soft clinking of cutlery on porcelain, the hushed murmur of important conversations, and the scent of freshly brewed espresso and expensive perfume. Jordan Maxwell sat in a plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the ballet of ground crews and aircraft on the tarmac below. She wasn't drinking champagne or making loud calls. She was nursing a bottle of sparkling water and reviewing complex differential equations on her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. At 21, Jordan possessed a quiet intensity that often made people underestimate her. She was dressed in comfortable but well-made travel attire, dark jeans, a simple cashmere sweater, and clean white sneakers. Her hair was styled in intricate braids that fell just past her shoulders. To the casual observer, she was just another college student. But the equations on her screen weren't from a standard undergraduate textbook. They were the foundational architecture for a proprietary neural network she had designed, an algorithm so revolutionary it was poised to redefine predictive modeling in the biotech industry. She was on her way to Geneva to be a panelist at the World Symposium of Applied AI, the youngest speaker to ever be invited. The first-class ticket, a gift from her proud father, was a practical choice. She needed to arrive rested and ready to stand before a room of Nobel laureates and tech billionaires. Her focus was broken by a strident, gratingly loud voice from a few seats away. "Richard, for heaven's sake, can you get someone's attention? This Chardonnay tastes like it's been sitting open since yesterday. For what we pay for this membership, you'd think they could manage a decent Sauvignon Blanc." Jordan glanced over. The speaker was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that looked both expensive and uncomfortable. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a severe lacquered helmet, and her face was a mask of strained dissatisfaction. This was Caroline Harrington. Her husband, Richard, a man whose muted gray suit and weary expression seemed designed to make him fade into the background, flinched at the sharpness of her tone. "Of course, dear," he mumbled, looking around for a server, his movements hesitant and apologetic. Caroline wasn't finished. She surveyed the lounge with a proprietary air, her eyes cataloging the other passengers, sorting them into silent categories of worth. Her gaze flickered over Jordan for a moment, and Jordan felt the instantaneous, dismissive appraisal. "Student. Probably flying on points. Doesn't belong here." It was a look she had felt 1,000 times before a microaggression so common it had become a dull, familiar ache. She was used to being the only black woman in rooms like this, advanced STEM seminars, tech incubators, and now exclusive airport lounges. She met Caroline's gaze for a brief second, offering a polite, neutral nod before returning her attention to her tablet. The dismissal stung, but she had work to do. Her algorithm needed one final diagnostic run. For the next hour, the Harringtons provided an unwelcome soundtrack to Jordan's preparations. Carolyn complained about the quality of the canapes, the speed of the Wi-Fi, and the attire of another guest. Richard's role was to absorb her complaints with a placating murmur, a man long accustomed to orbiting his wife's gravitational field of perpetual discontent. Jordan did her best to tune them out, losing herself in the elegant certainty of mathematics. Her algorithm was her sanctuary. It was a world of pure logic where bias and prejudice had no place. A variable was a variable. Its value was determined by data, not by the color of its proverbial skin. Finally, the boarding call for British Airways Flight 112 to Geneva was announced for first and business class passengers. Jordan packed her tablet into her leather carry-on, a well-worn bag that had been a gift from her mother upon her acceptance to Stanford. She stood up, stretched, and made her way toward the gate. As she walked, she felt Carolyn Harrington's eyes on her back again. The jet bridge was a sterile tunnel connecting the known world to the unknown. Jordan felt the familiar flutter of anticipation that always came with flying. It was a feeling of being suspended between two realities, a temporary reprieve from the world below. She found her seat 2K, a window seat in the forward business class cabin. It was a private pod, a self-contained world of polished surfaces, adjustable lighting, and crisp linens. She stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin, settled into the plush leather seat, and gratefully accepted the pre-departure glass of champagne offered by a smiling flight attendant. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was her reward. This was the culmination of 4 years of sleepless nights of sacrificing a typical college social life to spend endless hours in a computer lab chasing an idea that everyone told her was impossible. This flight wasn't just a journey across the Atlantic. It was a passage into a new phase of her life, a life she had built for herself, line by meticulous line of code. Her peaceful moment was shattered by that same sharp voice. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." Jordan opened her eyes. Caroline Harrington was standing in the aisle looking down at her with an expression that was a cocktail of condescension and annoyance. Her husband Richard hovered behind her, his face already etched with a familiar look of preemptive apology. Jordan offered a small, polite smile. "I don't think so. My boarding pass says 2K. Caroline let out a short, incredulous laugh. She didn't even glance at the seat number. She simply looked at Jordan, then at the luxurious cabin, as if trying to reconcile two things that in her mind could not possibly coexist. "That's highly unlikely," she said, her voice dripping with implication. "Perhaps you misread it. Economy is in the back of the plane." The insult was so blatant, so utterly without pretext, that for a moment Jordan was speechless. The air in the cabin, once filled with the quiet hum of anticipation, suddenly felt thick and heavy with tension. Other passengers, sensing the brewing conflict, began to subtly watch the unfolding drama. Jordan felt a hot flush of anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down, replacing it with a practiced, icy calm. She would not allow this woman to rob her of her composure. She had earned this seat, and she would not be intimidated out of it. Jordan held Caroline Harrington's gaze, her expression unreadable. The smile she had offered moments before had vanished, replaced by a cool, level stare. "My boarding pass says 2K. She repeated, her voice soft but firm, a clear counterpoint to Caroline's abrasive tone. "This is seat 2K. I think you'll find your seat is across the aisle." Caroline's perfectly lipsticked mouth tightened into a sneer. "Don't be ridiculous. I know what seat I booked. Richard, show her our tickets." Richard fumbled in his jacket pocket, his movements clumsy with anxiety. He produced 2 ticket stubs and squinted at them. "Ah, well, you see, Caroline, dear, ours are 2E and 2F, the middle seats." For a fleeting second, a flicker of embarrassment crossed Caroline's face, but it was instantly replaced by a renewed wave of indignant certainty. The facts were an inconvenience to the narrative she had already constructed in her head. A young black woman dressed so casually couldn't possibly belong here on her own merit. There had to be a mistake. "That can't be right," she snapped, snatching the tickets from her husband's hand. She glared at them, then at Jordan, her eyes narrowing. "Well, fine, but I prefer a window seat." "You," she said, pointing a manicured finger at Jordan, "should move. Let's swap." It wasn't a request. It was a demand layered with the unquestioning assumption of privilege. The other passengers were now openly staring. An older man in 3A lowered his copy of The Economist. A young couple in the row behind paused their conversation. They were all witnesses now. Jordan took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne. She set the glass down on the small table next to her with a soft click. "No, thank you," she said, her voice still quiet, but now carrying a sharp, metallic edge. "I'm quite comfortable where I am." Caroline's face contorted with fury. She was not accustomed to being told no, especially not by someone she had already deemed her inferior. "Now you listen to me," she began, her voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of a flight attendant who was making her way down the aisle. "I don't know how you managed to get on this flight or who you think you are, but this is business class. There's a certain decorum. People like you shouldn't be causing problems." The phrase hung in the air, ugly and venomous. People like you. The flight attendant, a woman with a warm smile and a name tag that read Grace, arrived at the scene. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" she asked, her tone professionally placid, though her eyes betrayed a weary familiarity with this kind of confrontation. "Yes, there is a problem," Caroline exclaimed, turning on Grace. "This person," she said, gesturing dismissively at Jordan, "is refusing to move from a seat she probably doesn't even have a ticket for. I demand that you see her boarding pass. I suspect it's fake, or she's an employee trying to sneak a free ride." Grace turned to Jordan with an apologetic look. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry to ask, but would you mind just showing me your boarding pass so we can clear this up?" Jordan's anger, which she had been holding in a tight, controlled knot in her stomach, began to burn. She was being questioned, put on trial, because this woman's prejudice was being treated as a legitimate concern. She looked at Grace, then at Caroline's smug, expectant face. She knew that showing her boarding pass would prove she was in the right seat, but it wouldn't solve the underlying issue. It would only validate the premise of the question that her presence here was inherently suspicious. "My pass was already checked at the gate, and by the attendant at the door," Jordan stated calmly. "Is it standard procedure to re-verify passengers once they are seated, or is this a special circumstance?" Grace hesitated, caught between airline policy and the escalating scene. "No, ma'am, it's not standard procedure. I'm just trying to de-escalate the situation." By treating a baseless accusation as credible, Jordan countered, her voice low and steady. "By making me prove that I belong here." Caroline let out a derisive snort. "Oh, please, the drama. If you belong here, then prove it. What's the problem? Unless, of course, you can't. Maybe you spent every last penny you have on the ticket, and now you're getting buyer's remorse. This is a very expensive seat for someone who looks like she's flying Spirit Airlines." She looked Jordan up and down, her eyes lingering on the simple sweater and jeans. "Let's be honest, you're probably too poor to be in business class anyway." The words spoken with such casual cruelty seemed to suck the air out of the cabin. It was the core of her prejudice laid bare for everyone to see. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about money class and race, all tangled together in a toxic knot of pure, unadulterated bigotry. Richard Harrington finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Caroline, please," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Let's just sit down. You're making a scene." "I will not," she hissed, shaking him off. "I am a Diamond Medallion member. I will not be made uncomfortable on a flight I paid thousands of dollars for. I want her removed. She is clearly a fraud." The cabin was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system. Every eye was on Jordan. She felt the weight of their gazes, the mix of pity, curiosity, and judgment. In that moment, she was no longer Jordan Maxwell AI prodigy and guest speaker. She was a symbol, a public spectacle. The anger in her chest finally gave way to a cold, hard resolve. She had tried to be polite. She had tried to be discreet. That was over. Slowly, deliberately, Jordan reached for her handbag. She didn't pull out her phone with the digital boarding pass. She bypassed it, her fingers searching for her wallet. She could feel Caroline's triumphant stare, believing she had won, that Jordan was finally admitting defeat and preparing to leave. But Jordan wasn't leaving. She was preparing to end the conversation. Jordan's movements were fluid and unhurried. She retrieved a sleek black leather wallet from her bag and placed it on her lap. She didn't look at Caroline, whose smug expression was beginning to curdle into confusion. Instead, Jordan met the flight attendant's worried gaze. "Grace," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "You've been put in an impossible position, and I apologize for that. But this passenger has made a serious accusation, and I believe it needs to be addressed, not just dismissed." She unzipped the wallet. The other passengers leaned forward slightly, a captive audience to the silent drama. Caroline, now impatient, crossed her arms. "Well, are you going to show us the pass, or are you going to call security on yourself?" Jordan ignored her. Her fingers slipped past her driver's license, past a few crisp $100 bills, and past several other credit cards. She was looking for a specific one. Not just to prove her point, but to make a statement. She found it a sliver of dark, anodized metal that felt heavy and substantial in her hand. She pulled it from its sleeve. It wasn't a standard plastic credit card. It was the iconic heavyweight American Express Platinum card. The polished metal caught the cabin light, glinting with an unmistakable aura of financial authority. The annual fee for the card alone was more than the cost of an economy ticket to Europe. Still, without looking at Caroline, Jordan held the card out for Grace to see, along with her boarding pass, which she had tucked behind it. "Here is my boarding pass for seat 2K, she said, her voice clear and resonant. "And this is the card I used to purchase it." Grace took a half step back, her eyes wide. She recognized the card immediately. It was a silent, powerful rebuttal to every accusation Caroline had made. It was more than proof of purchase. In the unspoken language of status that people like Caroline worshipped, it was a trump card. The effect on Caroline was instantaneous and profound. Her jaw, which had been set in a belligerent line, went slack. The color drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking stark and yellow under the cabin lights. She stared at the platinum card, as if it were a weapon pointed directly at her fragile ego. She had built her entire argument on the bedrock of a single racist assumption that Jordan couldn't afford to be there. And in one silent, metallic flash, Jordan had demolished that foundation, leaving Caroline's bigotry exposed and unsupported for all to see. The cabin, which had been holding a collective breath, seemed to exhale at once. A low murmur rippled through the rows. The man with the economist gave a single appreciative nod. The young couple behind Jordan exchanged a look of pure astonishment. Richard Harrington looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He tugged at his wife's arm again, this time with more force. "Caroline, that's enough. We're sitting down. Now." But Caroline was frozen, her mind struggling to process the cognitive dissonance. The world as she understood it, a world with clear, visible hierarchies, had just been turned upside down. The young black woman in the simple sweater held a symbol of wealth that even she, in her expensive but tasteless pantsuit, did not possess. It was impossible. It didn't compute. That's probably a fake," she stammered, her voice a weak imitation of its earlier stridency. "Or it belongs to her father. There's no way." Her words trailed off, lacking any conviction. She knew, and everyone in the cabin knew, how pathetic she sounded. Jordan finally turned her head and looked directly at Caroline, her eyes cold as ice. "The name on the card," she said, slowly enunciating each word with precision, "is Jordan A. Maxwell. The same name on the boarding pass. The same name on my passport. Are there any other pieces of identification you would like to inspect? Perhaps you'd like me to log into my bank account for you, or would you prefer to see the acceptance letter to the World Symposium, where I'll be speaking tomorrow? Let me know what level of proof is required to convince you that a black woman can be successful enough to sit in seat 2K without your permission." The verbal evisceration was complete. Each question was a hammer blow, shattering the last remnants of Caroline's composure. Humiliation, stark and vivid, washed over her. She had picked a fight with the wrong person, and she had lost spectacularly publicly. She finally seemed to shrink, collapsing in on herself. Without another word, she stumbled away from Jordan's seat and sank into her assigned middle seat, 2F. Her face a blotchy mask of shame and fury. Richard scurried into his seat beside her, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Grace, the flight attendant, let out a long, quiet breath. She gave Jordan a look that was a mixture of deep respect and profound apology. "Miss Maxwell," she said, her voice full of sincerity on behalf of the entire crew, "I am so deeply sorry you had to experience that." "It's not your fault," Grace Jordan replied, her voice softening. She slipped her card and boarding pass back into her wallet. "But I hope the airline will take this matter seriously." "Oh, we will," Grace assured her, her professional smile now replaced by a look of grim determination. "We most certainly will." As she walked toward the front galley, she discreetly spoke into the intercom, her words inaudible but her purpose clear. The situation was far from over. As the cabin doors were secured and the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, an uneasy peace settled over the business class section. The Harringtons sat in stiff, mortified silence, a black hole of tension in the middle of the cabin. Caroline stared blankly at the seat back in front of her, her face a frozen mask, while Richard seemed to be trying to physically shrink himself out of existence. Jordan took a deep, shaky breath, the adrenaline from the confrontation beginning to subside, leaving a tremor in its wake. She had won the battle, but she felt no triumph. She only felt weary. The incident had been a stark reminder that no matter her accomplishments, no matter how high she climbed, there would always be people who saw her race before they saw her humanity. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the runway lights blur as the aircraft gathered speed. Just as the plane lifted off the ground, a voice cultured and gentle with a British accent came from the seat behind her. That was an absolutely disgraceful display. "I hope you're all right, my dear." Jordan turned to see an elderly gentleman with kind eyes, a neatly trimmed white beard, and a tweed jacket that looked as though it had seen decades of academic conferences. He was looking at her with genuine concern. "I'm fine," Jordan replied, mustering a small smile. "Thank you. More than fine, I'd say." The man continued, his eyes twinkling. You handled that with a level of grace and fortitude that was truly remarkable. He extended a hand over the seat divider. Alistair Finch, it's a pleasure to meet you properly. Jordan's eyes widened in recognition. The name hit her with the force of a physical shock. Dr. Alistair Finch was not just any passenger. He was a titan in her field, the pioneering mind behind the Finch paradox in quantum computing and a Nobel Prize winner in physics. He was also the keynote speaker at the Geneva Symposium, the man whose work had inspired her own research. Dr. Finch, she stammered, shaking his hand. I'm Jordan Maxwell. I've read all of your papers. It's an honor. Dr. Finch's smile broadened. Ah, Miss Maxwell. Of course, the Stanford prodigy. Your paper on stochastic modeling and genomic sequencing was nothing short of brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I was so looking forward to meeting you at the symposium. I had no idea we'd be on the same flight. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the quiet cabin. Across the aisle, Jordan could see Caroline Harrington flinch at his words. Stanford prodigy. Brilliant. Each compliment was another nail in the coffin of her prejudice. You read my paper? Jordan asked, overwhelmed. Read it. My dear, I studied it. The way you've applied quantum principles to predictive algorithms is a genuine paradigm shift. I was telling my colleagues just last week that your work will do for biotech what Shannon's did for information theory. He leaned in conspiratorially. Don't tell the other panelists, but your presentation is the one I'm most excited to see. This public effusive praise from a man of Dr. Finch's stature was more powerful than any platinum card. It recontextualized Jordan completely, not just as someone wealthy enough to be in business class, but as someone intellectually superior, a peer to the world's greatest minds. It was a validation so complete, so irrefutable, that it rendered Caroline's earlier insults not just baseless but laughably absurd. Dr. Finch then glanced over toward the Harringtons with a look of cool disapproval. He didn't seem to know them, but he understood their type. His next words were seemingly directed at Jordan, but pitched just loud enough for those nearby to hear. It reminds me of your father, you know, he said thoughtfully. He has the same quiet strength, the same refusal to suffer fools gladly. Jordan looked at him confused. You know my father. Of course, Dr. Finch boomed. Dr. Robert Maxwell is one of the finest neurosurgeons in the world. He performed a miraculous surgery on a dear friend of mine at Johns Hopkins a few years back. A remarkable man. The apple, it seems, has not fallen far from the tree. It was the final devastating blow. By invoking the name of Dr. Robert Maxwell, a celebrated and respected figure, Dr. Finch had not only confirmed Jordan's legitimacy, but had also placed her within a lineage of excellence. The Harringtons who built their identities on a shallow foundation of brand names and perceived status were now confronted with a woman of substance, a product of a legacy they could never hope to touch. At that moment, the lead flight attendant, followed by Grace, walked down the aisle and stopped beside the Harringtons' seats. The lead attendant, a stern-looking man named Mr. Davies, knelt to speak to them in a low, urgent tone, but his words were audible to Jordan and Dr. Finch. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. Your behavior during boarding was unacceptable. You racially harassed another passenger and caused a significant disturbance. The captain has been fully briefed on the incident. Richard Harrington's face was ashen. It was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Davies cut him off sharply. There was bigotry. This is a formal warning. Upon landing in Geneva, we have the right to have you met by airport authorities. The captain has graciously decided against that on one condition, that you remain quiet for the remainder of this flight and do not interact with Ms. Maxwell in any way. Furthermore, to ensure the comfort and safety of our other passengers, particularly Ms. Maxwell, we are moving you. Your new seats are 34E and 34F. 34. Caroline squawked, her voice a horrified whisper. That's premium economy. It's the last row of the section, yes? Mr. Davies confirmed, his expression unyielding. We feel it's best to create as much distance as possible. Please gather your belongings. Now. The humiliation was absolute. Being publicly admonished was one thing. Being physically removed and demoted to a lesser cabin section was a declaration of their pariah status. Heads turned as Caroline and Richard, their faces burning with shame, collected their purses and jackets. As they did, the walk of shame down the long aisle past the other business-class passengers, who stared with a mixture of pity and contempt. They had to pass Jordan's seat one last time. Carolyn couldn't resist a final hateful glare. Jordan simply met her gaze, her expression a blank slate of indifference. She then turned back to Dr. Finch, dismissing Caroline as if she were nothing more than a passing inconvenience, which to her she now was. Dr. Finch Jordan said, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. Tell me what you thought of my application of the Hadamard gate in the second phase of the algorithm. As the disgraced Harringtons disappeared toward the back of the plane, Jordan and the Nobel laureate launched into a spirited high-level discussion, their conversation a symphony of intellect that was the true currency of the world they inhabited, a world Caroline Harrington had tried and failed to enter. The rest of the flight passed in a surreal bubble of peace. Jordan spent nearly 3 hours engrossed in conversation with Dr. Finch, a conversation so stimulating it felt like a masterclass at 35,000 feet. He treated her not as a student, but as a colleague, challenging her assumptions and celebrating her insights. For the first time that day, she felt completely and utterly in her element. The ugly confrontation with Caroline Harrington began to feel like a distant, unpleasant dream. What Jordan didn't know was that the incident was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning its second life. In seat 3A, the man who had been reading The Economist had done more than just watch the drama unfold. His name was Ben Carter, a freelance journalist who specialized in long-form pieces on corporate culture and social justice. When Caroline had launched into her tirade, Ben's journalistic instincts had taken over. Quietly, he had angled his phone and recorded the entire exchange, from the "people like you" comment to the final pathetic stammering about the platinum card. He had captured it all. Caroline's aggressive posture, Jordan's steely calm, and the shocked faces of the other passengers. As soon as the plane's Wi-Fi service became active over the Atlantic, Ben did what any modern journalist would do. He edited the clearest 2-minute clip, wrote a brief factual caption describing the event. Woman on BA Flight 112 from JFK to GVA harasses young black passenger, accuses her of being too poor for business class, before being shut down completely, and posted it to his Twitter account, which had a modest but respectable following. He added a few relevant hashtags: flying while black business class bigot British Airways, and on a whim airline Karen. Then he put his phone away and went to sleep. When he woke up hours later as the plane began its descent into Geneva, his phone was practically vibrating itself into oblivion. The video had exploded. His initial tweet had been retweeted over 50,000 times. It had been picked up by major news aggregators, celebrity accounts, and activist groups. Airline Karen was the #1 trending topic in the United States and the United Kingdom. The internet, in its faceless collective power, had become judge, jury, and executioner. Amateur sleuths armed with screenshots and facial recognition guesses had embarked on a digital manhunt. It didn't take them long. Someone recognized Caroline's distinctive, severe hairstyle. Another found a picture of Richard from a charity gala. Within 4 hours of the initial post, Caroline and Richard Harrington had been positively identified. Their digital lives were immediately laid bare. Commenters flooded the social media pages of Caroline's employer, a mid-tier luxury lifestyle brand called Aura Living. They found her LinkedIn profile, where she listed herself as Vice President of Brand Strategy, a title that now dripped with bitter irony. They found Richard's profile at the corporate law firm, where he was a junior partner. The court of public opinion was in session, and the verdict was unanimous and brutal. By the time the plane touched down on the tarmac in Geneva, Caroline and Richard Harrington were blissfully unaware that they had become the main characters in a global morality play. They disembarked quickly and sullenly, eager to escape the scene of their humiliation, disappearing into the anonymity of the airport. Jordan, however, was treated like a minor celebrity. As she deplaned Mr. Davies, the lead flight attendant was waiting for her on the jet bridge. "Ms. Maxwell," he said, his tone deeply respectful. "On behalf of the captain and the entire British Airways crew, I want to apologize again. We have already filed a formal incident report, and I can assure you that the Harringtons have been permanently banned from flying with us or any of our partner airlines. Their behavior has no place on our aircraft or in society. Thank you, Mr. Davies. I appreciate that," Jordan said sincerely. As she made her way through immigration, her phone reconnected to the global network. A deluge of notifications poured in. Texts from her parents who had seen the news. Alerts from her university's Black Student Union offering support. And dozens of social media tags. A friend had sent her a link to Ben Carter's tweet. Jordan stopped in the middle of the bustling terminal and watched the video. Seeing it from an outsider's perspective was jarring. She saw Caroline's venom, her own forced composure, and the quiet dignity of Dr. Finch's intervention. She saw herself through the world's eyes, and for the first time, she understood the scale of what had happened. It wasn't just a personal insult. It was a public flashpoint, a perfect self-contained example of the casual, poisonous prejudice that so many people faced every day. Her first instinct was to shrink from the attention. She was a private person, a scientist who preferred the quiet solitude of her work. But as she read the thousands of comments under the video, she saw something powerful. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination, of being questioned in stores, followed by security, or underestimated in the workplace. Her unpleasant encounter had become a catalyst for a much larger conversation. She found Ben Carter's profile and sent him a direct message. "Thank you for documenting that. You didn't show my face clearly, and I appreciate the discretion. My name is Jordan Maxwell." Ben, astounded, replied almost instantly, "Jordan, the world is cheering for you. You are a hero to so many today. If you're willing, I think people would love to hear your story in your own words." Jordan thought about it for a long moment. She had a platform now, whether she wanted one or not. She could either let the narrative be defined by an anonymous internet mob, or she could take control of it herself. She thought of all the other young black women in STEM fighting for a place in rooms where they were told they didn't belong. Her choice was clear. "Okay," she typed back. "Let's talk." The fallout for the Harringtons was not gradual. It was a sudden, catastrophic collapse. While Jordan was being celebrated as a symbol of grace under pressure, a tidal wave of public outrage was crashing down on every aspect of Caroline and Richard's carefully constructed lives. Caroline's phone began buzzing before they had even checked into their hotel, the Four Seasons Hotel des Bergues, on the shore of Lake Geneva. The first call was from her boss, Jonathan Sterling, the CEO of Aura Living. His voice was colder than the alpine air outside. Caroline, he said, foregoing any pleasantries. I've seen a video. Jonathan, it's been taken completely out of context, she began, her voice high and panicked. It was a simple misunderstanding about a seat. A misunderstanding. Sterling cut her off, his voice incredulous. I saw you harass a young woman. I heard you tell her she was too poor to be in her seat. Our brand is built on an image of inclusive, aspirational luxury. Our entire fall campaign is centered around diversity. Do you have any idea of the damage you've done? The aura. Living Instagram account has lost 50,000 followers in the last 6 hours. We're being review bombed. The hashtag boycott Aura is trending right behind Airline Karen. I can fix this, Caroline pleaded. I'll issue a statement. An apology. It's too late for that, Sterling said flatly. The board held an emergency meeting an hour ago. Caroline, your employment with Aura Living is terminated effective immediately. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the terms of your separation. Do not contact anyone at the company. Do not speak on behalf of the company. You are done here. The line went dead. Caroline stood in the opulent hotel room, the phone still pressed to her ear, the dial tone a mournful dirge for her career. The job had been her entire identity. The title, the expense account, the sense of importance, it was all gone, evaporated by a 2-minute video clip. Richard's reckoning came moments later. A senior partner from his law firm, a formidable man named Arthur Vance, called him. The conversation was brief and brutal. Richard Vance said, his voice heavy with disappointment. We've seen the video. While you were not the primary aggressor, your passivity, your failure to intervene while your wife engaged in such abhorrent behavior in public reflects catastrophically on your judgment and character. This firm cannot and will not be associated with this kind of public scandal. We represent a diverse clientele. We have a reputation to uphold. Arthur. I can explain, Richard began feebly. There's nothing to explain, Vance interrupted. The partnership has voted. We are requesting your immediate resignation. If you refuse, we will proceed with a termination for cause, which, as you know, would be a black mark on your record, from which you will never recover. Be smart about this, Richard. Take the resignation. We'll draft the agreement, have it signed and returned within 24 hours. Click. 2 careers incinerated in the span of 15 minutes. They sat in the silent, suffocatingly luxurious hotel room, the dream vacation they had planned, now awake for their former lives. Their social standing, which Caroline had guarded so jealously, was annihilated. Texts from friends and colleagues went unanswered. Invitations to upcoming charity balls and golf tournaments were quietly rescinded. They had become socially radioactive. Caroline began to weep, not with remorse, but with self-pity. This is all her fault, she sobbed, her face blotchy and distorted. She set me up. She did this to us. Richard, for perhaps the first time in their marriage, looked at his wife with something other than passive obedience. He saw not a powerful socialite, but a petty, insecure woman whose arrogance had just cost them everything. No, Caroline, he said, his voice quiet and hollow. You did this. You couldn't stand seeing that girl in that seat. You had to open your mouth. You always have to open your mouth. The accusation, so uncharacteristic from her docile husband, shocked her into silence. The foundation of their marriage built on his compliance, and her dominance cracked under the immense pressure. They were 2 strangers trapped in a gilded cage of their own making, with a long, silent flight home to a life that no longer existed. They would fly back in economy on a different airline, their names now synonymous with public disgrace. The unraveling was swift, total, and merciless. A week later, Jordan Maxwell stood on stage in a packed auditorium in Geneva, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. She delivered her presentation with a confidence that belied her years translating her complex research into a compelling narrative of innovation. The audience, which included Dr. Finch and some of the brightest minds in technology and science, was captivated. When she finished, they rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. The story of what happened on the flight had by then become an inseparable part of her own. In her interview with Ben Carter, which was published in Wired magazine, she had spoken not of anger, but of opportunity, the opportunity to discuss the subtle and overt barriers that people of color, especially women, face in fields like tech and finance. She handled her newfound fame with the same poise and intelligence she had displayed on the plane, becoming an accidental but powerful advocate for change. The day after her speech, she received an email with a subject line that made her pause: an apology and a proposal from Aura Living. It was from the CEO, Jonathan Sterling. He expressed his profound regret for Caroline Harrington's actions and asked if Jordan would be willing to take a video call with him. Intrigued, she agreed. On the call, Sterling looked haggard, but sincere. "Ms. Maxwell Jordan," he began. "First, I want to apologize to you personally. What you endured is antithetical to everything our brand claims to stand for. Firing Ms. Harrington was the first step, but it's not enough. We need to do better, and I believe you can help us." He continued. "I've spent the last week doing a deep dive into this mess, and in the process I learned about you. I read about your work, and I realized the world is smaller and more ironic than I could have ever imagined." He explained that for the past 6 months, Aura Living's tech division had been searching for a next-generation AI solution to revolutionize their e-commerce platform and supply chain management. They needed a predictive engine that was faster, smarter, and less biased than anything on the market. Their top choice, the one their engineers called a game changer, was a new groundbreaking algorithm being licensed by a small boutique tech consultancy out of Palo Alto. The algorithm, Sterling said, a look of sheer disbelief on his face, is called Maxwell's Crucible. "It's your algorithm, isn't it?" Jordan felt a slow smile spread across her face. The startup she had co-founded to license her technology had been in negotiations with several companies, but the deal with Aura had been the largest. And the person at Aura, who had been leading the charge against the high licensing fee, arguing that they could build a cheaper version in-house, had been the VP of Brand Strategy, Caroline Harrington. In her arrogance, she had been unknowingly trying to lowball the very prodigy she would later accost on a plane. The irony was almost poetic. This was Jordan's moment. She held all the cards. She was not just the victim of his former employee's bigotry. She was the key to his company's future success. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," Jordan said, her voice calm and professional. "That's my work. We want to license it," he said, the words rushing out. "We will meet your firm's asking price. In fact, we will exceed it. We will add a 20% premium to the final price." Jordan listened, then leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "The price is the price, Mr. Sterling. I'm not interested in profiting from this situation personally, but I am interested in seeing you turn this into a genuine moment of corporate change." She then laid out her terms, not as a victim demanding reparations, but as a strategic partner dictating the cost of doing business. Aura Living would pay the original full licensing fee for her algorithm. The 20% premium he had offered would instead be donated in Aura's name to a list of charities she would provide Black Girls Code, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. Furthermore, Aura would have to enter into a multi-year partnership with these organizations, creating paid internship programs specifically for minority students in tech and marketing. And finally, Jonathan Sterling himself would have to issue a public videotaped apology, not a vague corporate statement in which he would detail the specific steps the company was taking to ensure their workplace and their advertising were truly inclusive. Sterling was silent for a long moment, stunned by the audacity and brilliance of her proposal. She hadn't asked for money for herself. She had leveraged a moment of personal humiliation to create a lasting institutional legacy of opportunity for others. She had transformed karma into code prejudice into progress. "Yes," he said finally, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "Yes, of course. We will do all of it." In the end, Caroline Harrington's hateful words did more than just destroy her own life. They inadvertently funneled millions of dollars into the very communities she despised and forced the company she loved to undergo a public and painful reckoning with its own values. The woman she had called too poor for business class had, with the quiet power of her intellect, orchestrated a corporate and social restructuring that would echo for years to come, proving that the most powerful currency isn't money or status, but intelligence, integrity, and a well-timed karmic twist of fate. 2 years passed. The world, with its relentless news cycles, had largely forgotten the story of Airline Karen. But for the individuals at its center, the incident on Flight 112 was not a fleeting headline. It was a defining event that had irrevocably altered the trajectory of their lives, sending them spiraling in opposite directions. Dr. Jordan Maxwell, the doctor, freshly minted from a fast-tracked PhD program at Oxford, stood at a podium in Las Vegas, not as a panelist, but as the closing keynote speaker for the Consumer Electronics Show. Before her, an audience of 10,000 tech executives, journalists, and engineers hung on her every word. She spoke with an easy authority, her passion for ethical AI illuminating the vast auditorium. The quiet, reserved student was gone, replaced by a confident visionary leader who had founded her own successful AI firm, Maxwell Dynamics. Her company was now a leader in creating bias-free algorithms, a mission born directly from her experience. Her first and most famous client, Aura Living, had become a case study in corporate redemption. The Maxwell interns, the diverse group of students sponsored by the program Jordan had mandated, were now a highly sought-after talent pool in the industry. 2 of them were in the front row, watching her with rapt attention. Jordan caught their eye and smiled. This, she thought, was the true outcome of that day. Not the downfall of her aggressor, but the uplifting of those who came after her. The incident was no longer a wound. It was a scar that had taught her the topography of her own strength. Far from the glittering lights of Las Vegas, in a beige-colored suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, life proceeded without applause. Richard Harrington pushed a shopping cart through the fluorescent-lit aisles of a Costco. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by ill-fitting khakis and a polo shirt from a brand he once would have considered beneath him. The law firm had cast him out, and the scandal had made him unemployable at any other reputable firm in the country. He now worked as a remote contracts reviewer for an obscure insurance company, a monotonous, soul-crushing job that paid just enough to cover the mortgage on their modest townhouse. He moved with the stooped shoulders of a man perpetually braced for a blow, the ghost of his wife's public implosion clinging to him like a shadow. Caroline's fall had been even more profound. Stripped of her career, her social circle, and her husband's enabling wealth, her identity had crumbled to dust. Her name was now so toxic that the only job she could find was working the customer service desk at a sprawling Dillard's department store in a suburban mall. On this particular Saturday, she was processing a return for an impatient customer. She wore a cheap polyester blouse and a plastic name tag that simply read, Carol. Her once imperious voice was now a flat, rehearsed monotone. Yes, ma'am. Do you have the receipt? As she scanned the item, she caught her reflection in the security mirror above the counter. She saw a tired, middle-aged woman with faded blonde hair, crow's feet of bitterness etched around her eyes. The VP of brand strategy was gone. The Diamond Medallion member was gone. All that remained was Carol sorting through other people's unwanted purchases. A young couple walked past her desk, laughing. The woman was black, impeccably dressed, carrying a shopping bag from a luxury brand Caroline knew well. She looked successful, happy, and completely at ease. For a fleeting second, the old familiar venom rose in Caroline's throat, the instinctive, ugly judgment. But it died just as quickly, leaving only a hollow ache. The world she had tried to police, the hierarchies she had fought to maintain, had moved on without her. She was no longer a gatekeeper. She was not even a ghost at the feast. She was simply irrelevant. She finished the return, handed the customer her refund, and said in a voice devoid of all emotion, "Have a nice day." The karma that had found her wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, mundane, and absolute, a life sentence of the very invisibility she had once feared above all else. That single ugly moment on Flight 112 set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It wasn't just about a woman being put in her place, it was about the profound and often hidden connections between prejudice and power. Jordan Maxwell didn't just win an argument. She rewrote the terms of engagement. She proved that the best response to bigotry isn't just a clever comeback or a viral video, but a strategic, intelligent, and transformative action that uplifts others. Her story is a powerful reminder that your true worth is never defined by the small minds of others, but by the strength of your character and the brilliance of your work. The world is full of Caroline Harringtons, but it is the Jordan Maxwells who truly shape our future. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice and karma. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts.